Let's take a look at the U.S. public response to the AIDS crisis. By 1990, AIDS was here, dangerous, and apparently here to stay. How did the U.S. respond? Let's explore the social and to some degree the psychological aspects of the disease. First, what was the psychological effect of AIDS on those who did not contract the disease? Here we enter what I'll call the realm of the mythic. It was generally believed in the late 1980s that AIDS would inevitably spread to the general population. U.S. News editor Mortimer Zuckerman stated, "It is a delusion to think AIDS is confined to homosexual men and IV drug users." On the popular TV drama St. Elsewhere, the plastic surgeon Bobby Caldwell contracted AIDS from a girlfriend, and Oprah Winfrey predicted that as much as 20% of the general population might die within several years. The Masters and Johnson's book, Crisis, Heterosexual Behavior in the Age of AIDS in 1988, suggested estimates of those infected that were off by 100% or more. The book concluded, the AIDS virus is now running rampant in the heterosexual community, but the book was based on small, unrepresentative samples. College campuses responded with clinics offering safe sex, sometimes required as part of freshman orientation with the distribution of free condoms. The U of Wisconsin hosted Condom Olympics with a mascot, Pat the Prophylactic, and candy bowls of condoms appeared everywhere. At Dartmouth College, AIDS awareness groups practiced slipping condoms onto plunger handles. But for all the semi-paranoia, AIDS never entered the general population. It did, however, affect the blood supply and IV drug users. The context for drug users was, of course, poverty. At shooting galleries on the street, they rented needles and syringes and reused them. This was the perfect breeding ground for the spread of HIV. Heroin and cocaine users were especially affected. One solution to the problem was the introduction of needle exchange programs. Addicts could exchange dirty for clean, no questions asked, and studies showed this to be very effective, up to 30% reduction in AIDS transmission. But in the U.S., strict laws prevented needle exchanges. There was strong opposition that came from politicians not wanting to appear to support drug use in spite of the program's success. No needle exchange program could receive federal funding in the U.S., the main reason being prejudice against this minority. Most, of course, opposed drug use combined with prejudice against AIDS, and some even tacitly supported the status quo, allowing drug users to share needles, thereby increasing the risk of their dying. Contrast this to Britain, where addicts had access to shared needles. The response was a needle exchange program. Local politicians overcame opposition that argued that giving needles was condoning illegal drug use. By the late 90s, new infections were steady at 40,000 per year, with 40% of infections among IV drug users. Republicans who controlled Congress during the Clinton administration cast the problem in moral terms. They refused to fund needle exchanges. Hemophiliacs were also affected by social attitudes. In Anderson County, Tennessee, a 12-year-old hemophiliac was forced to leave school. In Florida, a family's home was burned because children had HIV, again hemophiliacs. And 14-year-old Ryan White, also hemophiliac, was forced to leave school in Kokomo, Indiana. Take a look at this YouTube clip summarizing Ryan's experience.